Welcome to today's live webinar entitled Tackling the Big Data Conundrum, Smarter Marketing with Social Listening. Today's program is sponsored and presented to you by the Meltwater Group. At this time, I'd like to turn the call over to your host, Leslie Nuccio. Please go ahead.
Tackling the Big Data Conundrum, Smarter Marketing with Social Listening. Hello, everybody. I am Leslie Nuccio. I am the Content Marketing Strategist at Meltwater, which is pretty much a fancy name for a writer. So I've been in digital community marketing for a really long time, a little longer than I'd probably care to admit. And I actually started my first social media program back in 2008. And I've actually had the advantage of being at Meltwater for the last 2 years, getting to do content marketing, which has been a lot of fun and has allowed me plenty of time to play with our tools and understand what the world is saying about pretty much anything. So what does Meltwater do, you might be wondering? Meltwater products monitor the internet for traditional and social media content outside the firewall and deliver real-time insights so that marketers like me and you can make informed and data-driven business decisions. So the shorthand for that is that we make big data marketing solutions, and the reasons that these are so critical in today's marketing environment is what I'm going to talk about today. Please do follow me on Twitter at Leslie Nuccio, and of course follow Meltwater at Meltwater, and we'll follow you back. And if we don't, you can flush us. So if you'd like to tweet during this session, even if it's your lunch order, please do use the hashtag ListenUp. So today we're going to take a closer look at solving the big data conundrum with social listening. And you may be asking, why am I going to bother with all that data? And the answer is actually pretty simple. Your message will probably fall on deaf ears unless you're delivering it the right way to the right person in the right place. Now, there is tons of data out there. It is really, really big. And that data is coming from the conversations that are happening out there online. So the challenge for us as marketers is figuring out how to make sense of all that noise in order to find the actionable insights that inform more strategic marketing efforts. And with that in mind, if you take away anything from today, I am a firm believer that the key to mastering today's technology-driven communications landscape is engagement, the magical word. So in order to spur engagement, we do need to figure out how to have the right conversation with the right person in the right place. And it's really in that order. And that sort of qualified interaction is what leads us to engagement. So you may be sort of fairly wondering why I chose an image of a cut-open trailer with two elderly people in leisure suits holding a fluffy dog to make this point. And the answer is engagement, because everybody on this call, like me, has probably spent a fair amount of time in stock photo sites, and the things that you come up with can be a little bit questionable. And when I found this image, I thought this is really epic for other marketers. I just had to use it. So from an engagement standpoint, I thought you guys would like it. And if you want to prove me right, you could tweet it out right now with the hashtag ListenUp. And then these lovely people on this slide will have proven the trifecta of bullet points. And that brings us back to the original point. Effective modern messaging campaigns are designed to spur engagement as the #1 objective. And with that in mind, we're going to have a poll. So are you guys using a monitoring tool to inform your marketing efforts? As far as I know, you guys can see this and are able to respond, hopefully. I have no control of it, so if you could, oh, look, people are responding. I'm going to give you guys, I'll count down from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. This is fun, the numbers are changing. 4, 3, 2, 1, the poll is over. All right, so now we're going to jump in. So 44 of you aren't. Okay, great. So today we're going to bravely explore modern marketing to understand how and why to harness big data, the vast mountains out there. See this guy? The data is this big, in order to craft strategic marketing programs that spur engagement. We're going to answer 3 big questions. How did we get here? And we're going to go over the 4 social disruptors of communication to see how technology has really dramatically and really very quickly changed the modern messaging landscape. We're going to figure out why we care. And we're going to talk about vanity metrics versus actionable metrics. And that is when I'll explain why engagement is the #1 KPI of our communications programs today. And then we're going to figure out what we do now. And we're going to look at social listening across the organization, which is how to harness the power of all of that big data media intelligence. And then, as our lovely introductory guy told us, we will open it up for Q&A. So we'll hold questions to the end, but you can type them in at any point during the presentation, and they just get queued up, and I'll answer them later. All right, let's dive in. Social technology has fundamentally changed the way that people communicate. We see it in our everyday lives. Sharing a message with a friend who looks eerily like you in sepia tone does not take a tin can anymore, nor is it often a one-on-one conversation. So these days, sharing with an entire community of friends is as easy as clicking a button. And the real power of social media for us as marketers lies in the social networks that make the everyman a media outlet. And it's those networks that carry the conversation that we as marketers care about. So it's really important to understand the conversations that we care about as marketers, we don't necessarily start them. They can start anywhere. They can be started by anyone. They can die anywhere. They can change and grow, and they can be amplified ad infinitum. And what that means for marketing and PR is that social media technology has also fundamentally changed the way that successful communications programs work. And with that in mind, there are 4 main social disruptors of our traditional communications programs. And they are, number 1, target audience disruption. So, back in the day, we used to broadcast a message at a predefined and, very often pre-purchased audience. But nowadays, we're really aiming to get our message amplified by a social community. That's what we also call that word-of-mouth marketing. If you've heard that sort of message amplification comes from there. So if you think about what the difference is between those two, an audience, by literal definition, is a group of people who witness something, whereas a community is an interconnected group of people who participate in something together. And in a community, people are actually intentionally connected in some way, whether they're friends or colleagues or whatever. And so that's really where we clearly see that difference. A traditional messaging campaign aims to influence individual viewers directly, whereas a socially minded marketing campaign aims to influence community members collectively by sparking conversation. Number 2, channel reach disruption. So our communication channels used to have very defined borders, and an audience was very specific to that channel, and we could speak directly to that audience. And that is still oftentimes where our messages can start. So if we have placement in the New York Times, for example, that is a direct line to a limited number of people, right up until people start sharing that article. And once that content is shared, it has the potential to go spectacularly viral via social networks and the word-of-mouth marketing. And that is why the earned social media is so powerful, because that message amplification is potentially limitless. Number 3, source credibility disruption. So source credibility is fun for me to talk about because I remember back at South by like 5-6 years ago, it's one of those topics that was debated really early on, actually even more, probably like 10 years ago, with the advent of bloggers. Like how seriously should we communications pros take a pool of people who aren't actually held to the same rule set as a traditional journalist? And there was a lot of concern about that. But as the communications market has matured, we have, I think, now all come to understand that our best influencers may or may not be traditional journalists, and that bloggers or social influencers may actually be better resources for us than a reporter. So they may or may not be objective, but that is the nature of the beast, and that is what makes a targeted influencer strategy even more important. Now, another thing that I find pretty interesting about the source disruption itself is that both our owned and our earned social media are subjective real estate. So there's, opinions all over the place. And that is, of course, part of the reason that earned social media is so valuable, because the folks in a social network are very highly attuned to subjective content from someone that they're intentionally connected to. And lastly, we get to communication consistency disruption. So I touched on this a little bit. In the traditional communications model, we crafted a monologue message and we hoped that it resonated. And in a socially networked model, we're actually trying to start a conversation. So that takes our messaging from a monologue to a dialogue. And it also means, and this is important, it means that the consistency of our message can't be controlled. So if we're going to sum up those 4, with the communications landscape having gone from the traditional monologue communications model to the social dialogue marketing model, we do lose control of the message. But that's actually a good thing because it means that our reach is completely unlimited. And that brings us to the power of engagement. Back to engagement. We're going to talk about why it matters. So engagement is what gets us the viral message amplification. That's the holy grail of a modern dialogue-driven communications program. Now, the funny thing is, if you actually think about communications this way, things actually haven't changed a whole lot, because back when we consumed and created messages on products made of paper, the reason that a personal Rolodex was actually so valuable to PR pros for example, was because the targeted quality interaction that it afforded was way more likely to lead to engagement, i.e. pickup, than blindly throwing out a release on the wire or throwing out, a pitch to a media database. So engaging a journalist does still lead to earned traditional media, i.e. the eyeballs attached to the readers of the New York Times, just like a Facebook share gives us earned social media, i.e. the eyeballs attached to all my dad's friends when he shares adorable pictures of my kid. Hashtag proud grandpa. So what this means for us, what it especially means if we're still sort of working in the traditional communications model, is that old standby KPI of impressions is not our primary measurement. It does matter, but I don't think that it's our primary measurement anymore, because engagement is our objective, whether we're in PR or social media marketing, because qualified engagement is, and it always was, what gives us those impressions in the first place. So this is where I'm going to draw a line between achievement and an opportunity. Right, impressions and reach are community-sized metrics, and those are an opportunity. We don't actually know whether or not the eyeballs in that community saw our message unless they engage, and that's why engagement is measurable. And that is also why engagement is an achievement. So, before interactive media, measuring engagement was really difficult, and it was almost never real time. And so we used to do things like focus groups and polls and studies, and we would measure the effectiveness of our messaging campaigns and, looking backwards, because that was all we could do. But that's not our only option anymore, because our customers are actually talking all the time. And so if we can figure out what they're saying, we can not only measure the effectiveness of our own communications programs that are already out there, but we can also figure out the way to find the engagement to spur the engagement that we need. So, like, some of the questions we can answer, we can figure out not just what people are talking about, but, where are they talking about it? Who are these people? Isn't there an influencer I should care about? And the fantastic thing about big conversational data is that it helps us understand what people are talking about before we try to join the conversation. And that leads to a dialogue marketing cycle that looks like this. So lather, rinse, repeat. That is good advice for the shower. And it's also good advice for our dialogue marketing initiative. So these are the 3 core steps to a dialogue marketing cycle. You listen first to the conversation, you analyze your influencers, the sentiment volume, whatever you're trying to measure, then you engage, and then you go back to the beginning and you keep going it. And so it's an ongoing cycle. And the great thing about that is that once you start a program, you can keep listening and measuring. The real-time communications landscape, as challenging as it can be, gives us a big advantage in that we can change creative on the fly. Because if we're listening, we can understand if we've started a messaging campaign and it doesn't really seem like people are hearing us, we can change it and see what happens. And we can also identify where we should change it. So once we start listening, we actually may find that like one channel is helping us and another is hurting us, and we have 5 influencers we didn't even know about. And those are the sort of actionable and what I would call a data-driven insight that help us craft the right messages for the right people before we reach out. Just one of the key things to remember is that all good conversations start and end with listening. So we circle back here to the modern communications landscape in which we marketers aren't necessarily the ones starting the conversations we most care about. Those conversations can start anywhere, by anyone. They can die, they can take a turn. You have no idea where they are going. They can go viral. Oh my gosh. Word of mouth gives us message amplification and it gives us this huge earned media upside. But there is one problem. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this. This is Brian Solis's Conversation Prism, but it does a pretty good job of illustrating the challenges that we're facing as marketers. The first time I saw this, I thought, that's awesome. It looks so chaotic. And then I realized it looks so chaotic because it is so chaotic. We as marketers are at the center of an endless and ever-growing real-time sea of conversation, and it's supercharged by social technology. So that same message amplification effect that affords us the amazing earned media upside does have a pretty big downside, and that is that we can have way too much of a good thing. So some people call this big data. That's what I put in, the slides. It's still kind of the buzzword. I think at some point, we'll just call it data. But it is fairly really, really big because each of the tiny icons on that prism alone, and I doubt that it's exhaustive, represents an ongoing and really incomprehensibly large volume of information. So without the right navigational tools to make sense of that constantly growing sea of data, we are lost and drowning in the center of it all. But don't worry, I would not leave you all lost and drowning. There is hope. So finding our bearings in today's interconnected communications ecosystem does require two things. Basically, you need a high-level view of the overall messaging landscape, and you also need the ability to zero in on the people and places that matter. Sometimes I explain like it's like a hawk hunting, like they go way up to look at everything and then zoom, they're in. So by understanding where we're going, why, and who's going to be there, we stand a far better chance of engaging the right people in a quality conversation that amplifies our message. And the really short way of saying that is the better our big data marketing tools are, the easier our job is. So the challenge to modern marketers is really a needle in a haystack problem. We need answers. We don't need data. And what that means practically for us is that if we don't have a tool to pinpoint exactly what we need to inform and assist our business efforts, whether that be a journalist in the greater Sydney area who wrote positively about solar power in the past year, or just a high-level understanding of what the trends are in alternative energy worldwide, a bigger haystack really just means more digging to find that needle. And so ideally you want tools, or we want tools, yay, I have access to these tools, that give us two things, breadth of coverage and sophisticated search technology. So we definitely want a good breadth of sources for monitoring. This is actually, this is our haystack. So we do want a tool that monitors conversations, not just on all the major traditional and social media networks, though. Blogs, comment fields, review sites, message boards. The greater breadth you have, the better chances you have of finding exactly what you need. And I'm going to touch on blogs here because blogs have become really, really important in the modern sort of journalism landscape because bloggers, journalists, and social influencers really do have a handshake now. They are very often telling the same story. So 81% of journalists are using Twitter, and I actually was surprised about this. 89% of journalists research their stories on blogs. And what this means for us and why it's important is that if we post something on Facebook and it gets tweeted and shared around, a journalist might actually see that on somebody else's we've earned social media, a journalist sees it somewhere else, and then they decide to write something. And so that I actually call that the indirect pitch. It's when we get bona fide, earned traditional media placement because of content that someone else shared or created about us on a social network. Look at this astonished man. We also want a sophisticated communication search engine to find that needle. And when I say sophisticated, what I mean is one that will astonish you, just like this astonished man is feeling, with its ability to hyper-target your searches to find exactly what you're looking for, person, place, or thing. That is lifted from the Schoolhouse Rock Now song, I admit it. So, but I actually felt like this when I first played with these tools because I could not believe all the information that was out there. And then the ability to hyper-target in on exactly what I was looking for is really, really amazing. And the reason that this kind of pinpointed search is so instrumental in modern messaging efforts is because by doing what no mere mortal can, which is, analyzing gazillions of content sources at once, it enables us marketers to answer questions that used to be incredibly difficult and time-consuming to obtain. So I'm going to focus mostly on this first one. Is there a journalist out there who's been writing positively about biodiesel in the greater Houston area in the last 3 years? Right? Finding not just that person, like finding out whether or not that person exists, but also finding that person's contact info used to be really, really heavy lifting, you guys. And now it's literally like a click of a button, like boom, oh, there he is. All right, and there's 5 others. Fantastic. So, and then obviously there's larger messaging stuff that you can find out. What are our customers saying? Where's the best place to introduce this message? So you can get all of these insights out of the information. How are our competitors positioning themselves per geographical region is one of those super interesting things to look at. You can kind of get some intel there on maybe where they're going. So all of those questions can be answered if you do a little social listening with your astonishing search engine. And the great thing about this sort of a tool is that it can also astonish people across marketing and beyond. Some of those people, I admit, look a little bit afraid, but I think they're overwhelmed by the big data. They don't understand how amazing it can be for them. So why that's good news for you is because if you really, really want this technology and you're having trouble selling it up, you can actually potentially share the spend with another department in your organization. Or, you can send your managers this presentation and hope it helps, or just have them call me, or no, have them tweet at me because it'll help my cloud score. So anyway, that brings us to the final chapter of this webinar, which is social listening across the organization. So when we say social listening, when I say that, it's social media monitoring equals social listening equals social search. They're all the same thing. So social listening specifically is one of the major payoffs of that sophisticated communication search engine that I was just talking about. And social listening does give us a really easy and consistent way to find information on our company, our competitors, our customers, and our industry. So we're going to circle back to the dialogue marketing cycle really quick, just remembering good conversations start and end with listening, even if you're not in marketing. But we're going to start with marketing because we have a lot of uses for this. So social listening for marketing strategy. We touched on this earlier. One big advantage of social listening is that it's a quick and easy real-time look at what folks are saying out in the real world. And with that in mind, social media monitoring services most initiatives that might have once required consumer research or focus groups or polls with the advantage of being real time. So I don't know how many people on this call have ever done a focus group. They're super fun. You get to sit in a room. There's like darkened glass. There's snacks involved. But number one, the folks who are in that room are aware that they are in a focus group because they are being paid to sit there and give you opinions. And number two, it's a very small subset of folks, right? So when you're listening with a big data marketing tool, you're actually aggregating the entire internet. And so you're just getting a lot more accurate information. Crisis communication. This is, I'm sure, near and dear to many people on this call. It's something that we all have to prepare. It's definitely hard to determine how bad it really is. So social monitoring during a PR crisis can help us determine the scale of the problem, and it can give us an idea as to our best response and positioning. So you guys can read the bullets, but I'm just going to tell you a story because it's fun. So I was in social media in like 2008, and we didn't have any tools like this at all. And then I worked for a T-shirt company, and Rachel Maddow held up one of our T-shirts on television and told her audience that my company was okay with killing the president, which was not true at all. And suddenly, you know, the deluge of emails started coming in. And I mean, obviously, this was going to be a problem no matter whether, you know, whether we had this tool or not, this was a problem. But at the time, we were so in the middle of it, it was really difficult to understand, you know, how big it really was, what was going to be the best way to kind of shut this down. Should we have the conversation? Should we not have the conversation? Should we just try to end it? And if we'd had the advantage of being able to understand really whether there were any detractors or like core detractors we might actually be able to flip around, whether there were any influencers we might be able to talk to, you know, that might have been something that we would have been able to steer into a positive brand sentiment as opposed to just having to shut it down, which is what we had to do. Social listening for creative direction these are little hacks that I like to use. So as I mentioned before, social listening is definitely a great way to figure out whether a program or promotion you're running is resonating with the target audience. But it's also a really great way for creative direction because you can test tone, messaging, and imagery to see what's getting the most engagement. So one of my favorites is testing email subject lines on Twitter because before you're going to hit a big list, you may as well know what they're going to click on. And Twitter is like a super lo-fi way to do that. Try if you have the advantage of a TV spend budget, try the YouTube channel first because it's going to give you an idea of what's going to resonate, and try imagery on Facebook and Twitter before an ad spend. So a great example here is Kmart. I don't know if you guys saw, I think it was 2 years ago, they did a video called Shit My Pants. That is a P in the first word. That is obviously an intentional scatological aside that they have put in there. And it was a big departure for them, this sort of humor that they were using on YouTube. And it went massively viral. And then like Ad Age wrote about it and everybody was all excited. And so I think it gave them a really good data point on, you know, that yes, they can use humor in their videos, at least on that channel. And I think we've seen it sort of influence their marketing since then. So I don't think that you would guess that this man in a suit on a tin can is going to end in a story about a frozen burrito, but I will get there. So if there are any product marketers on this call, this one is for you. Listening to your customers before you launch a new product or service is a great way to find out what they think before spending a fortune on R&D. And it's a really great way to spot industry trends that can lead to new product ideas. So I actually have two true stories on this one. Number one is we had a client that made really nearly indestructible iPhone cases, and they learned that a huge percentage of their brand chatter was coming out of Japan, which was really, really interesting to them because they did not actually sell their iPhone cases in Japan. So they decided to change that, and they quickly came up with a go-to-market strategy for Japan as a new market, and they had their key social influencers already identified because that's how they found this in the first place. So worth noting, a good social media monitoring tool does break down chatter geographically for you. But my favorite story is the frozen burrito story, because there was a frozen burrito company that started a social monitoring program, mostly just to see what their general brand sentiment was. And they noticed that a lot of positive sentiment was coming from Twitter, specifically as a channel. And they also noticed that the bulk of that chatter was happening after midnight, especially on the weekend. So maybe not surprising, but that was nice for them to have a data point on that. So they realized that late night snackers were a great target community for sales and new products, and they consequently adjusted their online marketing to engage directly with that crowd. And so out of that engagement, they found a few key Twitter influencers who helped spearhead a contest and invented a new product, which was the late night frozen breakfast burrito. So social listening for customer service is probably, I think, one of the first things we saw brands doing with Twitter in particular. I think when nobody knew what to do with Twitter, we all just figured, well, we should probably use it for customer service. And I think that was somewhat out of necessity, because customers are going to use that channel whether or not we want them to. So if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense to use Twitter that way, and Facebook really, because a social media customer service program is really just monitoring taken one step further to focused and channel-specific engagement. So one thing that is really important, we must have a process in place to manage the concerns that come in via our customer service channels, whether they're social, whether they're the phone, because tweets that fall into a black hole are not going to help our customers feel warm and fuzzy at all. This is one of the less obvious use cases for social listening, I think, human resources. So corporate reputation sites like Glassdoor, they do tend to cater to the detractor. And much like, surveys and polls, really, right? People need to be amped up about something to answer. And with static content, they don't tell the whole story. So you can serenely listen and answer critical questions for HR, like what are your current employees saying about you? What are your ex-employees saying about you? What are your prospects saying? What are your employees saying about your competitors? And what are your prospects saying about your competitors? That's a really interesting one, especially if you're in a competitive hiring environment. Right here in Silicon Valley, or we're in San Francisco, but basically in the Bay Area, it's a fairly competitive hiring environment, especially for engineers. So this is a really great way for HR to kind of understand where they're falling compared to the competition when it comes to hiring. That little bird is on that man's shoulder because I'm going to talk about Twitter. So investors are people too, right? And people talk. So you can frame your brand name searches. I don't know if anybody on this call has ever had to prep for an IPO, do a road tour, or actually see a PR program through that. I've seen it. It's a ton of crazy work. This would be very, very helpful. You can frame your brand name searches with filters specific to investor relations. So just terms like IPO and stock price and shares and Q4 earnings call will turn a general brand sentiment search into a social media effort that your CFO can actually support. And if you are an investor, you can actually take a listen for all the things that we just talked about to gauge the overall health of a company that you're evaluating. So this is where I'll talk about Twitter. So I measured Twitter's IPO when they went public because I was really interested to see what was going to come up. And it actually ended up being super interesting. So the word cloud brought up two trending terms that I did not expect to see: chaos and modest. And when I dug deeper, I learned that the chaos term was being written about mostly by traditional media and then being retweeted by like people who were interested in the articles actually, as having specifically been avoided by Twitter's crack finance team. And it had very unflattering comparisons to Facebook's more mercurial IPO. So that's a great example of a traditional media source and then that earned social media amplification. I mean, it was huge. The word modest trended around the stock price, which was really interesting because it wasn't actually cheaper than Facebook's IPO price, but the social sentiment pointed towards people thinking that that particular stock price was that particular stock was actually attainable for them. So on a day when a bunch of young guys became gazillionaires, the word modest as a theme was a pretty big surprise to me. And what that means is that Twitter's pricing and their messaging platform around the IPO gave them an era of accessibility that worked. And if you were on that messaging team, I mean, that's a really great insight. It worked really well, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. So here's where I'm going to blow your mind. everything that we just learned, we can also do for our competitors. So social listening, because it uses public information outside the firewall, competitive analysis is actually as easy as putting in another search. So we can look at positioning. I like this a lot. Look at positioning. How are they talking about themselves? Are they changing their language? That might give you a hint, like maybe a new product's about to launch. Maybe they're going to go into a different space. Like, what is happening? Are their investors, customers, and employees happy with them? And what are the main themes there? From a content perspective, what's working for them? Have they made any product or service announcements? What's their positioning? What's the reaction? So there's this great story about, there was a guy waiting in line, a really long line in Vegas to check into a hotel, and I don't remember which hotel it was actually, getting really annoyed, and he tweeted like, sign it, let's say it's the Sands. And somebody from, I think, Treasure Island saw it. They were monitoring their competitors and tweeted back at the guy, not like sleazy, not like get on over here and check in, just, oh, we're so sorry that you're having a hard time over there. Here's 5 restaurant recs, or like gave the guy some restaurant, or a bar rec for when you're done. And that guy was so happy about that he ended up having his wedding at the hotel that helped him, relax after his horrible check-in experience. So those are like the great opportunities. And I really love that story, especially because the person who was running that account was so smart. They didn't just try to be like, ooh, let's get a sale. They were like, here, let me help you. Let me help you feel better about this in like a very non-sleazy way. So that's a really great example of how this monitoring can pay off. Nonprofit initiatives are near and dear to my heart. I've done a lot of volunteer work. So nonprofit organizations are uniquely suited to employ social listening across their organizations because social media does lend itself to cause-related chatter. And that's the great thing, like donor relations, positioning, crisis, partner targeting in particular, because people are unified around a central theme, it's really easy to find the folks that actually might be aligned with your cause. People are sometimes a lot less, brand specific than they are, cause specific. So this is a great story. Social listening in action. We have a client in the form of a British borough, and their local authorities used our social monitoring tool to listen to their constituents during the Olympics when they were in London. And so the torch was going to be run through their borough, and they wanted to be able to immediately assess whether there were any logistical issues that needed real-time attention. As you can imagine, when a torch is running through a small British town, there's probably going to be some issues. So as they listened, they did discover that people were having a lot of trouble getting to the viewing spots for the torch running because the park and ride lots were really full and the bus lines were long and people were complaining. So the municipality actually decided to dispatch extra buses, and then they actually decided to engage. I think they originally were just going to listen, but then they realized that they were going to actually give people some useful information. So they started letting them know when the buses were coming, where they were going to show up, where they might find some more parking. And then everybody got super excited, and they were tweeting back pictures of the torch to the government and thanking them and tagging them. And I mean, it's really not every day that people are super excited about their local government. So that was a really big win for everybody. So getting good results is really as simple as building good searches. So here's what I do. So knowledge is power. Understanding why we're listening, and that means both the business and marketing goals for a social monitoring program, that helps us craft better searches, and in turn, it just yields better results. If you don't know yet, sometimes it's good to just put in a general search and kind of see what's coming up, and then sometimes that'll give you a sense of direction in terms of where you should be going. So number 2, narrow your searches. All social listening tools have limits on the number of results that your account can return at any given price point because the data is just not free. So because professional tools pull in millions of data sources every hour, it really is a good idea to add filters to your searches, especially if your brand name is a commonly used word like Apple. So if you're monitoring social sentiment around a specific brand or event, especially if it's a big one, consider putting in modifiers. So like that word cloud that you guys are looking at, the South by Southwest Tagosphere, those are the searches I put in for South by last year. And I didn't just put in SXSW because that was just going to be a disaster. So instead, I put in the speaker names. It allows for comparative analysis. When you have multiple searches, you can, do volume comparisons. In this case, Grumpy Cat was talked about way more than even Elon Musk was, which was funny. And then you'll find stuff that you didn't expect. So I was measuring some of the lounges and the parties and stuff because I wanted to see which brands, who was using their spend well. Samsung and New American did really, really well. So, but I was really interested. I kept seeing Olivia Wilde coming up, and she was on a show called House. I don't know. She's an actress, and she was in Austin promoting her new film. But she kept showing up in the drinking cloud, and I was like, why is Olivia Wilde in the drinking cloud? So I was digging into the data and looking at it, and it turns out that there's a lot of parties at South by. So the later it gets, the more inebriated folks get, and it seemed that the more inebriated folks got in Austin, the more they were interested in running into Olivia Wilde in the streets of Austin, which was really funny. And honestly, if I was on her management team and I had known that, I might have done a PR stunt like scavenger hunt for Olivia Wilde through the streets of Austin, like some sort of a bar crawl. I don't know. She might not have to do that, but it would have been funny. All right. So what have we learned here today? In a nutshell, today we looked at the socially tech-fueled communications ecosystem to understand how and why to use social listening to harness the vast mountains of big data out there in order to craft well-informed marketing programs that spur engagement. And I know that sentence was incredibly dense. That's a lot of information. And so I'm going to sum it up for you. So number one, engagement really is our number one objective. Social networks have fundamentally changed the way that effective communications programs work. The traditional monologue broadcast model has been replaced by a social dialogue model. And that model makes engagement our number one objective because out of that engagement, we have an unlimited earned media upside. And fortunately for us, engagement is actually measurable with the right tools. And that allows us to focus on actionable metrics as our core KPIs. Number two, listen before we speak. Now, this one does go contrary to most marketing temperaments and most notably my own, but it is an important one. Understanding what people are saying before we try to engage them gives us a better chance of engaging them, whether those people are traditional journalists or online followers. So, like I said it before, effective data-driven marketing campaigns start and end with listening. But the sheer volume of conversation out there is it's impossible to understand without a sophisticated search engine to pinpoint exactly what we need. So, and number three, social listening is not just for social marketing. There is a misapprehension that the information out there outside the firewall, and most notably the user-generated social conversation, is only relevant to marketing initiatives and social media marketing initiatives specifically. But that is not the case. The vast amounts of data out there can be utilized to inform smarter and more strategic business efforts across your entire organization. So democratized intelligence really is as easy as having the right tools. And if you just can't get enough of social listening, hey, I wrote a book. It's called Listen Up, The Definitive Guide to Social Listening for Smarter Business, and you can download it there for free at the resources link. And you can also check out the Meltwater blog because that is where you will find me writing about nerdy marketing things and stuff. So thank you, guys. We ran early. I see some questions are queued up here. I know that people can put them into the phone as well. Please do follow me at Leslie Nuccio. That is my Twitter handle. And follow Meltwater. And now it's time to open it up for questions.
Leslie, do you have a web question?
I do. I have quite a few of them, actually. All right. Here are all the questions. For PR, can you build a media list based on topics previously covered instead of beats? Yes. So that's what I was talking about with the sophisticated social. So building, I know that people are so accustomed to building media databases based on reporters and beats and actual publications, but that's that's why this is so powerful, because when reporters are writing, that's their conversation, right? So you can actually find out, you can qualify your media database by their topics of interest. So, I mean, you can even hyper-target it to, if you find the guy who wrote positively about biodiesel in Houston in the last 3 months or whatever, you can also see what else he's writing about. And if he's writing about 4 other things when you're, tweeting at him or whatever, you have a way better chance of engaging him, because if you find out that he has, a brand new poodle or something, right, you can use all of that stuff. And so that's why building that media database that way is so incredibly effective. Are there any particular social media channels that you recommend over others and any that you don't recommend? I don't know if that means for listening or for a social media marketing program, but I think that it really just depends on what you're doing. I mean, like, I think I gave a couple examples. I really like Twitter for quick and twitchy stuff, so testing subject lines. It's really easy to get people on Twitter to click on stuff. It's not really easy to get folks on social media channels to leave the native apps. They don't like to do it. So I don't necessarily like to see, you know, hey, we're running a sale and like click off site. It doesn't convert as well. But overall, I think that choosing the right channel, I mean, honestly, I would listen first. So figure out what your business objectives are, figure out how the marketing objective maps to that, and then take a look and monitor and see what folks are saying out there, and that will help you identify which channels are going to work the best for you. Okay. Thank you, person at 1240. Any comments on multi-language social media? Well, social media does exist in many languages. So if that's a tool question, our tool does in fact monitor in like lots of languages. I think the press piece of our tool monitors in like 87 languages. It's insane. So yeah, you know, if you have a global organization and you really need people to monitor in lots of languages, then that is something to look for. It does exist both on the monitoring and the interface side. There are tools. Mostly social tools, actually, I think the interface side is in English, but the monitoring can be in many languages. So yes, that is out there for sure. As an influencer yourself, how have you been engaged by brands and PR people in the past? Did you feel like it was authentic, and any tips on how? You know what? One of my favorite things that ever happened was somebody sent me a physical postcard, and I know that goes contrary to my digital world, but it did get my attention. It was actually a resume, so this isn't really like a PR thing, but it was a resume on a postcard, and I was like, this is awesome. That was great, because it was different. So I think that the tips are, I think that you go back to basic content marketing 101, which is provide something of value, provide something that's entertaining, provide something that's engaging. If you're honest about it, I always say really good social media programs require real people acting like real people, and if you can pull that off and you have something of value to offer, I think that the engagement can be there. I think that it's when folks kind of try to, especially with headline jacking, when you try to add your voice where it's really not necessary, and by the way, John Oliver does a really hilarious piece on this, brands talking when they really, really shouldn't. But if you're talking when you should and you have something of value to add, I think that is the place where the engagement's going to happen. Oh, I saw any chance to slow down. I know I do talk fast, but you guys, listen, the deck, I know that you can download. Any questions you can shoot at me now. We will probably, I'm sure, put it up on SlideShare, and there will be a replay. I know that this is very dense information, and so, you know, thank you for listening. Let's see. Have you found with your clients that the Meltwater product is being used mostly by marketing? Are other teams really catching on? So, you know, interestingly, I thought that. And so yes and no. I haven't done like a huge analysis. I'm not necessarily on the sales side. Also, you know, we're a private company, but no, it definitely is used across the organization, and in like sort of industries that you might not necessarily expect. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this presentation, is because when I realized, you know, because I'm obviously a marketer, I come from social, I've been in marketing my entire career. So I really didn't think about uses for social monitoring beyond marketing myself for about 6 months. And then I realized, wow, like there is a ton of data. This is amazing. Like think of all the things that you could know. And I thought back to, you know, the original job I had was in PR a really, really long time ago. And I thought about the focus groups and polls that we used to do. And, you know, something like a rebrand, for example, like a data-driven rebrand now is so amazing, because you can look at the real-time stuff. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do things like focus groups and polls, that you shouldn't do share of voice analysis, like, you know, the deep and dirty, like, analytic stuff that we do. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. What I am saying is that there's a way to do this real time, and there can be a handshake between the two where you're getting a very, very holistic view of what's happening with your brand. What are the best social media channels for medical practices? I don't know. That's a really good, I'm not a doctor. Let me think. So I did actually once consult on a medical brand. They were using Twitter and Facebook. I think that overall the question is, what do your customers want from you? Do they want to be able to get a hold of you? Do they want to know about your products and services? I know that I went to a Twitter for Marketers event probably like 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it's something like, I don't know, some insane number of people on Twitter are following 6 or more brands. And the reason that they're following those brands is because they want inside deals, inside information, and sales is basically inside deals. So they want stuff that they can't get otherwise. And so if you're like a healthcare group, I would say if you're a healthcare group, social monitoring right now, it's a great time to listen, because with Obamacare and everything else going on, you're going to find a lot of information out there on kind of the way that people are viewing healthcare programs. So I think that there's very few industries I can think of that would not benefit from understanding what the world is. I don't know, maybe underwater drilling or something. I don't know. But in general, I think that it's a matter of figuring out what you want to accomplish via those channels and what your customers want from you. Driving membership into a free online platform, best way to convert, landing page, link, ad. Let's see, here's the best way not to do it. So like I said, don't try to send people off native apps. They don't like to do it. It's just proven over and over again, conversion tanks. So driving membership, I think if it's a cold start problem, yeah, they're hard, you know, you have an awareness issue. I really like Twitter for cold starts. It's just fast. It's easy to test stuff. You can build up your following. You can follow other people. You can follow your competitors. Everything is out in the public eye. Right? That's a blessing and a curse. So I think that if you're trying to drive membership, you just need to think about why people want to join whatever platform you're trying to drive, and then take the channels from there, right? I use a free software to monitor news and social media that seems to be fine. Are there any big reasons why I should consider a paid service instead? The big data. Remember that guy with his hands spread out wide because it was so big? So the thing about free tools, I really like free tools when you're super strapped and you're trying to figure out kind of what you're doing. But the thing is, the reason that they're free is because it's a very small subset of the actual data that's out there. So you might have heard the phrase like the Twitter fire hose, like that fire hose ain't free. And there's a ton of information and a ton of data. And so, the paid professional grade tools just have way more breadth of coverage, way more data in general, and hopefully they're delivering actual insights to you so that you can understand which way to go. Like I said, we need answers, not data, right? So a really comprehensive tool that has been designed with your marketing challenges in mind is definitely going to yield you the best results and make your job way easier. Plus, it'll have the reporting features that make your job way easier when it's time to do your KPIs and have your Monday morning meetings. The best way to build an audience with niche markets. Find out where they are. Where are those folks? So that's actually one of the biggest arguments for a social monitoring tool in general, right? Is that if you have a niche market, like I have a friend, my friend Anna sells amazing handmade dog collars. They're made out of leather that's from horse tack quality. Here, I'll give her a plug, pacocollars.com. She's fantastic. So I've actually been helping Anna with her business since she was making collars in the basement of her West Oakland house. And now she has a store. And social monitoring is one of those things that really can help businesses, like tiny businesses like that have this very niche market, because your searches are easier, right? And I would say when you're looking at a niche market, so I like to illustrate examples. So like in Anna's case, for example, I would look at, and I told her this at the time, the target market is going to be like people who are buying supplements for their dogs. right? People who are doing rally and agility, like what I did dog rescue for 7 years, so I can lump myself in with the crazy dog people. The crazy dog people will spend $75 on a handmade, in the USA, rhinestone collar with like their name embroidered on it, right? So whatever niche market you have, I would say find the influencers. It's probably going to be easier to find the influencers, right, because it's a small market, and engage them. Even, give them free stuff, give them a free trial, like figure out who is making the most noise. It might be that one person is with, only a couple hundred Twitter followers is actually the person that you need the most because that person is so highly influential with his or her followers. Any tips for influencer strategy using a social listening tool? Yeah, so that's one of the things influencer strategy is so, I don't know, I kind of want to write a book on that. Influencer strategy is really interesting, especially nowadays when an influencer can be kind of anyone. You never know. Like some kid gets on the news talking about, I don't know, whatever word that kid said, and then he's on Ellen. Like you just never know where something's going to blow up. That kid might be an influencer. He could be a Gymboree model now. Who knows what's going to happen with that kid? I don't know if any of you know that redheaded kid I'm talking about, but if you probably Google Ellen redheaded kid, he'll probably come up. So building an influencer strategy, listen to the conversation first. If you have a really good tool, especially like a blog search tool, it will rank both the blogs and the person. So typically there will be some sort of a top score that will tell you kind of who has, there's clout obviously, but there's also, certain internal it is really important to understand kind of which blogs are getting the most activity, which have the most readers, and our algorithm takes a variety of factors in to decide which blogs are going to come up on top if you're looking for bloggers specifically. But yeah, don't forget about bloggers. Bloggers are really, really important nowadays. And then obviously social media influencers are a little easier to find because Twitter, Facebook, right, those numbers are typically, well, Twitter in particular, those numbers are public, so they're just kind of easier to see. But so I guess that my tip is, listen, figure out what you're looking for, and then engage, the folks that seem to be the most influential. What about social media listening for college recruiting? It's funny because I actually got emailed by USC just the other day, and they did an infographic they wanted me to look at. And I actually think that's a great idea. So that kind of goes along the HR thing, right? Because you can look at what people are not just saying about your school, but you can look at what people are saying about your competing school. So if you're Harvard, you probably want to see what high school kids that you might want in your school are saying about Yale and Princeton and everybody else in the Ivy League, right? I don't know that you necessarily want to reach out and engage. But I'm not actually necessarily saying that you don't. So it totally depends on what's happening. But from a monitoring standpoint, I think that that's a really great use case for that. Would you recommend a nonprofit entity solicit donations through social channels or rather offer more dynamic calls to action for engagement? That's a good question. I've seen it done well both ways. So I've done a lot of work with nonprofits, which has been a lot of fun for me. I think I would look at some of the nonprofits that do social and stuff really well. PETA actually does a really great job. I'm an animal person, so I'm really familiar with actually UNICEF does a really great job. The Humane Society of the United States does a really great job. I think that direct calls for donations are typically the best when they are tied to a reason other than, hey, we need money. So, when they're so for example, when the Michael Vick dogs, I don't know if you guys remember that, there was this big dog fighting bust. When that happened, the organizations that were directly dealing with the dogs, calling out for donations for those dogs specifically, that's a good idea. For one thing, it was actually necessary, right? And so I think that when you have cause-related calls to action, I don't know that it necessarily matters whether it's a direct, if you're doing a direct link on Twitter or something, you're automatically taking them off to the landing page. I would be more inclined to say, I honestly I would test it. Hey, we're trying to use this donation drive. The sense of urgency is always good. we're trying to reach this amount by this day for this reason, like, you know, here's why. And then you can also try like different messaging to kind of see what resonates. I mean, I think you probably all saw the Ice Bucket Challenge. I wrote a couple blog posts about it. That was a monster. I mean, they have obviously they have a lot of resources. They had celebrities and everything else, but my gosh, that charity initiative was so rad. It did so well. I couldn't even believe it. It was like the best charity initiative I've seen in terms of the way that it blew up. And if you think about why it worked, there was the challenge piece, right? They got really smart about people. It allowed people to be silly for a reason, and you didn't actually have to give any money to help the cause, right? So this is a case where armchair activism in a tech-fueled communications landscape actually provides a lot of value to the nonprofit because they're getting earned social media. Even if I don't give ALS $500, if I pour a bucket of ice over my head and put it on my Facebook page, or if I even just don't, but I challenge 5 people to do it, their job is done because I didn't even know who ALS was before the Ice Bucket Challenge. So I think that trying to figure out I think you need to give people a reason to donate, and you need to give them a reason to act. And if you can figure out those things, then social channels are really great for both testing how to do it and actually just, you know, having that message go viral. Is there a free tool I can test before diving into an expensive paid tool? Yes, I would Google it. Are there any other questions? All right, I don't think we have any other questions. Do we have any on the phone?
I'm showing no audio questions at this time. Do you have any final remarks?
Great. No, thank you guys so much for listening and paying attention and asking all these awesome questions. There were 16 of them. That's great.